I'm Marc Coles Ritchie. I just started with BLM last year. Happy to be here working in Grand Staircase, one of my favorite places in the whole world. First of all, I want to acknowledge the indigenous communities that have lived here since time immemorial. And as somebody who studies plants and loves botany, I acknowledge and recognize the great knowledge of the indigenous communities and their knowledge holders in understanding plants and how to use them. This area included Southern Paiute, Hopi, Zuni, Pueblo, Dene, Ute, and other tribes. And I'm so happy to hear Georgie and Otto talk earlier about indigenous perspectives. And I think it was Otto mentioned the tour of indigenous, or the intertribal gathering of indigenous folks. This is a photo of that group with multiple tribes represented, and then of course ancestral Puebloan sites. So my objectives with this talk today is to first of all have you jumping for joy like my friend Dante, who's 7 years old, and me the other day when we were out at Toadstools, and get you excited about plants. I hope you're already excited about plants, but they're so cool. I want to teach you a little bit about them. Can't teach you a lot in 20 minutes, but then I want you to go home or go back to where you spend time and learn more about plants. And I'll give you some resources to do that towards the end of this talk, in addition to what I share in the talk. So, for one just introductory point, when you're out with clients, tell them what you know, but don't make things up if you don't know them. And I appreciated what Autumn and Georgia said about this. If you don't know an answer to a question, say, hey, that's interesting, let's look into that, or let's try to find out more, but don't make up things, especially related to indigenous uses of plants. If you don't know, don't make it up. Just be respectful of tribal knowledge in that way. Originally, I was going to say, don't say something is edible unless you are positive, but then I scratched out positive. My advice to you is don't say things are edible, just because you never know. Unless, I'm not going to say unless, just don't say they're edible. So the flora of Grand Staircase and this region is just amazing. We have so many different habitats, dry areas and a few wet areas, and forests and grasslands and deserts and barrens and all kinds of different soils that create different opportunities for plants, really unique plants to thrive. And we have over 1,000 species here, which is about a quarter of all the plants species that are in Utah. Yet this Grand Staircase region is only 4% of the state, so we have a really high diversity of plants in Grand Staircase, which makes it a really fun, exciting place for a botanist like me. Including at least 43 endemic plants, meaning plants that grow nowhere else in the world. Their range is really limited. And it's often because of those soils that are so distinctive here. I'm not going to spend too much time on trees. These trees are easier, so go ahead and learn the trees on your own. That's the easiest group of plants to learn. So go ahead and study those. Fremont cottonwood are pretty easy. We have another cottonwood nearly. They're pretty easy to distinguish. Ponderosa pine is so majestic. I think you all know that one. I do want to spend just a second on pinyon and juniper, the most common tree woodland group community we have here. When we see them up close, you think, oh wow, they look very distinctive. You know, the juniper has these branches with just these little scaly leaves. And if they do have the seeds, they're these little blue and white cone-like structures, whereas the pinyon pine has the two longer needles that are an inch or two long, and these cones there's the pine nut inside, with the pinyon jays, and people have used for such a long time. Pine nuts were a really important source of food for indigenous communities and for the early settlers and explorers. They're just so tasty. From a distance, they are a little harder to distinguish, and you'll look out and just can't quite see. Is that pinyon or juniper? And they grow together, so we call it PJ. Pinyon juniper is the abbreviation. It's a really important ecosystem, plant community in this setting for wildlife, human uses. So get to know those two species. And they get really old. So this is the one detour I want to take down Tree Alley here. So over at Tilted Mesa, which you may know is the new BLM mountain bike trail just east of us here, they had cut some branches of trees for the mountain bike trail so that you wouldn't get poked as you're riding your bike along the trail. So I looked at these trees when I got here and said, there's some old trees here. And since they'd already been cut, it was real easy for Dan, Gunn, and I to go out and cut some, what we call cookies, which is little slices of trees, tree branches. And then you can sand them down and then magnify them with a camera and get some, and count the rings. So every year, in this temperate climate, every year there's a growth ring. So we can count those. So this branch on that juniper tree is 547 years old. This one is 623 years old from that branch right there. This pinyon pine is 322 years old from that half dead or mostly dead pinyon pine. These are all from Tilted Mesa, and we're in the process, Dan is in the process of installing some little signs next to each of these branches, so when you're hiking or biking, you can stop and see a sign that says how old this tree is. And here is one of those. It's actually this one. This far stump, we took a cookie, and that's what it looks like. It's this one. When you cut it with the saw, it's pretty rough. You'd look at it and think, oh, it's not too old. But then you sand it down really carefully with all the different layers, grits of sandpaper, till it's really fine. And then you can zoom in and take a photo and count the rings. Each one of these is a growth ring. And this distance right here is 1/8 of an inch. They grow so slow because it's such a dry setting. It's rocky, there's not much soil, there's not much moisture that's retained in that soil. So it grows incredibly slowly in that condition. Other conditions, the thing juniper can grow faster if there's moisture and if there's soil that holds the moisture. But the other fun thing about these rings is you can see the different widths. And the wider widths are when it was a wet year. So here's some wet years. Each of these are rings. Some wet years, a little drier, wetter, drier, very dry, super dry, and you can, and some people, dendrochronologists, use these to recreate climate history. But in this case, we were just trying to count how many rings to see how old this one was. Any guesses how old this one is? 726 years old. There's 726 rings. I'll pass this around in this branch, and it just shows how difficult it is to assess a tree's age from just looking at it, because this is not a very big tree.
Well, that's just a branch.
And this is just a branch, so the tree is older.
That was my question, was
Yeah.
it's just a branch, so the actual trunk, the actual stem could be potentially.
Almost certainly older, but we can't say for sure
Yeah.
until we cut down the whole tree. We don't want to cut down the whole tree. So that's my little detour about really old pinyon and juniper. It's such a fascinating field of study. And talk to me more about that sometime if you're interested. Okay, I'm not going to talk much about shrubs either. We have amazing diversity of shrubs. Sagebrush is the most common one. We have a bunch of different oaks, and I love this photo of the winter fat, beautiful, and sumac, and all those others. We're going to move on to cactus. Amazing cactus here. Diversity. A couple of these hedgehog cactuses. Photos on the left, and different choices that we have. And fishhook cactus that have a little hook on the end of the spine. I hope you know that was the fishhook. They're the fusion species. The prickly pears have lots of different colors of flowers: red, pink, orange, yellow. You can just call them all prickly pear unless you want to be a botanist and get into the differences. But even some of the same, even within a species, you can have different colors within the same species. So it's really interesting that way, and tricky, but taxonomically. I want to spend just a minute on grasses. I heard a podcaster, a scientist on a podcast recently who talked about this region, grasses really being the foundation of the ecosystem. They hold the soil, they provide forage for wildlife. They're really important here. I hope you get to know them. Somebody mentioned, I think it was Autumn mentioned Indian rice grass. I don't have time to get into all these, but just some really cool grasses. Oh, here's the Indian rice grass. It's a bunch grass. And here's a really thick patch of it. Bigger seeds, so a little more distinctive. The needle and thread grass last year just exploded with the good rains we had last year. So I'm holding up a stem of needle and thread grass that was, what, 4 or 5 feet tall. This is along the Escalante River. Beautiful patch of amber waves of green. This is a fun one just because you guys are out with clients, and this one grows in these circles, a sandhill mealy. You see that? Kind of like a donut hole there, here. It starts out growing and then it grows out, but the inner portion dies, so it creates this donut hole. And I've seen it 10 or 15 feet across. And they're not always continuous, something can break it up, so it's not always the same, but a good one to remember to talk to your clients and say, hey, look, there's sandhill mealy. It gets a little bit of a pinkish color to the seed heads right here in the summer, in late summer, fall. So that was my little detour down grass. So one more, Phragmites, along this stream here, Death Hollow, gets really tall, really big grass. And keep in mind that this is a native grass in southern Utah. In northern Utah, Phragmites is a different variety, and it's a non-native. It's a big problem. The state and different entities spend millions of dollars trying to get rid of Phragmites around Utah Lake, the Great Salt Lake, Jordan River, all that. Here we have a different variety. It's the native variety, so don't worry. It's the species we want. And as you're hiking along the Escalante or whatever, you're fighting your way through it. It's a little bit of a hassle, but it's native. Well, one more grass, darn it. Cheatgrass. You probably all know cheatgrass. An annual plant, it's not native. It comes in and disturbs soils. These are the little seeds that stick in your socks. Be sure to pull them out of your socks and leave them in that site or take them home and throw them in the garbage. But don't spread them around to your next campsite or your next spot you're visiting. It turns kind of reddish in the later summer. It starts growing in the spring and then it quickly dries out. And so there's in the spring when it's green and then it quickly dries out. Patches of it. It's only going to grow in really disturbed soil, so we want to disturb the soil as little as possible to avoid that. So let's get to the stars of the show, the wildflowers. Just want to see how much time we have. These are the fun ones. So colorful, especially last year, last spring, summer. The globe mallows were just on fire. It was so fun to see the fields of globe mallows. And in this previous grass photo, did you notice the globe mallows right there? And that was a minor show. But there's a bunch of different species of globe mallow, but they always have this orange flower, so it's pretty distinctive. You can just call it globe mallow and impress your clients. Columbine, one of the shows, beautiful flowers. This one only grows in springs or hanging gardens that we have around here on the cliff sides. It's just such a tough, beautiful plant. This one's alcove columbine. Columbine. You have a few different milkweeds. Called milkweed because if you break the stem or the leaf, it'll have a sap, a white sap that looks like milk. It'll ooze out of it. Really important for pollinators like monarch butterfly. This one grows in slightly wet areas, like this is along this line river, and then obviously a very dry area there. Sega lily got put in state flowers in Utah. We have a few different Sega lilies. This is maybe the one that's more common, or you're more familiar with anyway. That's got the white and reddish and yellow. But we also have the Marc Coles lily and this golden Mariposa lily. It's yellow, pink, just stunning colors, all within that Calochordus Sega lily group. And I put the scientific names in parentheses. You can ignore those unless you're like me and you like botany. We have a few different paintbrushes, beautiful flower. You probably know that one. I want to spend a minute on thistles because thistles have a negative connotation in our society because there are a bunch of weedy thistles that come in, especially in town and in areas where you disturb the soil. You get Scotch thistle and Musk thistle and Canada thistle that are really, really weedy. But we also have a bunch of native thistles. We have many native thistles in Utah that are really important for pollinators and insects. So we have multiple species, some native, some noxious, but don't kill them. I see, often when I'm hiking, I'll see native thistles that have been stomped on. I even see them sprayed by county weed control because they're hard to distinguish. So just, unless you're a botanist or trained in thistle identification, just leave them, enjoy them. They're pretty hard to distinguish. This is the non-native Canada arable thistle. This is the native Arizona thistle, or actually Caneville thistle. It looks like Arizona thistle. Just leave them alone, enjoy them. I know it's hard because we have this bias that thistle are bad, but not all. Some are. If you do want to, maybe we can do a volunteer trip sometime and remove thistle. There's some, I know where some are. So in wet areas, in the springs, we have some just amazing plants. I mentioned the columbine, you'll see those, you'll see this amazing stream orchid. Get a close-up of that with your camera when you're at a spring hang garden site. This can be really thick. You can see it's pretty dense right there. I love that plant. And if you're interested, Utah Native Plant Society had a talk about this plant that helped stop the MX missile from being built in the west desert of Utah and Nevada. Talk to me about that. I'm going to send a link out to anybody who signed up for this meeting with a bunch of information like that and some other resources. At websites, you also have the amazing monkey flower. Were you talking to me about that a minute ago? Yeah. I just love this flower. It can be pretty thick in patches along springs. This is a spring coming into, I think, Death Hollow or Sand Creek, maybe it is. See beautiful little red spots on the flower, a really delicate flower. And try not to trample it. I know you're getting water when you're backpacking at these springs. Try not to trample this beautiful flower. It's not very abundant in this dry landscape. Who's seen monkey flower? All right. There's also the scarlet monkey flower, yeah. The red one, crimson. Evening primrose, we have a bunch of species. This one on the left here is the common one that was exploding last year with our good rains, just a carpet of white across the landscape. It's a little bigger, spreading out kind of thing. This one, the tufted, meaning it just grows in a little clump, is not going to be as common as that one. This one you'll see along streams, this tall, long stem evening primrose, and there's a few others. They have a distinctive look. One of the things about botany is you try to see the patterns within a genus or a family, and then it gets easier once you see some of the similarities between the species within a group. Penstemon is another spectacular wildflower. We have a bunch of them. I think there's over 40 in Utah, 40 or 50. And Grand Stations, we probably have a good number of those. Maybe pink, blue, crimson, purple. They're just spectacular. There's the whole aster family. They're hard to distinguish. So just if people ask, it's in the aster family. They typically have this sunflower kind of look, the disc flowers and the ray flowers. These are two different types of flower on the same plant. This is like a composite family, meaning it's a composite of multiple flowers. This is not technically one flower, it's a composite of many flowers right there. Anyway, just call them the aster family. And then to finish up, the wildflower family. You should know this one. Tumbleweed. It tumbles in the wind. It's really abundant in some places where the ground is more disturbed. Try not to spread it around if it's caught in your truck or whatever. try not to spread it to, especially an undisturbed area.
Did you hear about the tumbleweed stampede?
Yeah, if you look on YouTube or social media, you can see these 10-foot tall mounds of.
That was on my street. They closed my street. We had 10, 12, 15 feet of tumbleweed.
Oh, really?
At
Where's
the
that?
backyard had 600, 700 tumbleweeds in it.
Where's that?
They climbed over the fence. Big break. And
Wow, I'm sorry.
that was last week.
So, one way to prevent tumbleweed from and Russian and cheatgrass from establishing is to maintain the biological soil crust. That's what you see in this photo. I'm sure you've all heard, don't bust the crust. Biological soil crust is a living crust. That's why it's called biological soil crust. In the past, it was called cryptobiotic and microbiotic. The term that we like to use now is biological soil crust. It's a simpler term, and it's very clear. Biological soil crust. You know, it's living, it's soil, and it's crusted. So it's a consortium of cyanobacteria, fungi, lichens, mosses, and algae. It's not all of, you don't need all of those, but it's got to be a combination of some of those. Super fragile. When you step on it, it breaks just like ice, you know, a thin layer of ice. But it does start to go back quickly, but at first it's just a thin layer, like the creme brulee, you know, or a thin layer of ice. And it's not going to be this beautiful, dark biocrust. It's going to be just a thin layer for the first few 5 to 10 years. And then after a few decades, you can start to get this pinnacled crust, you know, where it's really deep furrows and the white lichens growing on top of it. And it really holds that soil together, especially with the wind and the rain. And that helps prevent the establishment of the weedy species that have seeds that are just blowing in the wind. And so it also fixes nitrogen, stores carbon, really important thing. Of course, we're going to impact some of it. So I don't want you to have total fear, like, oh, we can't step anywhere, you've got to step somewhere. It does start to go back, but try not to disturb large areas of biological soil crust. All right, well, I'm over time, sorry. I'm not going to talk about rare plants, we have a bunch here. Try to not damage these really fragile areas. Welsh's milkweed is one that KFO is just now trying to protect on the road to Peekaboo. They're putting up some fences there, some signage, because it grows in the sand. It's the only place in the world where it grows. So let's try to stay off the barren sand. If you drive on the sand, you might be killing this plant, because the above ground stems die each winter, and they grow again next spring. So I will send out an email to this group with these plant identification tools. I created, when I worked for Grand Canyon Trust, I created this list of resources, web pages, books, and apps. You can also use iNaturalist, post pictures, and people will identify that for you, including me. Or you can just send me photos. I'm going to send you these links as well for citizen science and research in the monument. And I'll send you a link to my Flickr albums that has all the photos, most of the photos that I just shared. So I think I went a little long. I don't know if we have time for questions.
All right, please.